Hey everybody, welcome back to the Councilcast. My name is District Councillor Craig Reeves. I'm joined with District Councillor Charlie Homer. How you doing, Charlie?
I'm good, thanks. And you?
Not too bad, not too bad. We're going to tackle a rather large subject today. Planning. It's not the most exciting of subjects for many people, but it does affect everybody, whether you're looking to drop a curb outside your house, an extension to your home, convert a garage, or quite frankly, where you live. You know, how many houses are we building? Are we building enough houses for the future? And that's what planning is all about. But before we get on to that, there's a couple of updates that's been going on in the town. We've got the Riverside Shopping Centre. Charlie, what's been going on there?
I think we're just aware of the fact that, unfortunately, it's still a bit of a trap for litter and detritus that seems to either blow in or gets left by people that walk through there. So officers are completely aware. In fact, I spoke to another officer yesterday again about it. It's that tightrope of, we're going to knock it down very soon, but it needs to be kept tidy. Officers know that. Coming up with the solutions to make that happen and regularly, we keep on keeping on to try and make sure that is held to a good standard. And I've got no doubt that officers are working on a plan to make sure that's happening. I also don't know if you've noticed when you're walking around town, but you will see members of, what is FCC sort of, and their sort of outside contractors starting to do weeding and tidying up roads and stuff like that. And they've got big squads out in the last few weeks that have been doing and tackling areas. I was out really early this morning and I saw a group of people, obviously it's so warm, they were doing it. So that's good to see that happening too across the town. And of course, Craig, the roundhouse is now, you can see it. You can see it. It actually exists. It's not a David Blaine sort of like magic trick that we've had to deal with for 4 years. Is actually there.
If it is a magic trick, it's been the slowest magic trick in the world, isn't it?
You could dismantle it in that time, couldn't you?
You could. It's amazing because it looes so big with all that tarpaulin and scaffolding in it, and now they're kind of like, looks like they're unveiling a doll's house. It's
looks like it's been shrunk in the wash.
It has, hasn't it? It's been gone for so long. Yeah. So it's really exciting, and at the point of recording this podcast, there is still some scaffolding around it, but it looks to be coming down relatively quick.
Well, scaffolding, they always said it would take about 6 weeks to come down. The reason for that was obviously it was really intricate and they needed to protect the work they'd done, but equally some of the work that they needed to do they couldn't do until they had brought the scaffolding down to a certain level, so they're having to do some work as they take it down.
Interesting.
But it's amazing it's amazing. I know everyone's been frustrated with how it is. That project's been beset with setbacks, but the bank, they've paid for it all. It's not been anything that's been subject to council tax pay money. So it's good to see that the building is in a really good state. It does look, I think it looks really good. You can tell. You really can tell.
Yeah, and also yourself and myself have been in conversations with the future of the site as well.
It's ongoing.
You've been doing a deep dive. You've been doing some deep diving on that one.
The reality is the bank will end their tenure there, I think, on the 25th of August. So they stop being a bank 25th of August. And then they would like to gift the building to the community, and they're looking for a partner to help do that. The reality is it's quite a big liability. It's a Grade 1 listed building. So finding a suitable partner that can protect that as an asset for the town, but equally make sure that it's something that can live and breathe and be part of the market square and the work that goes on there. So those conversations are ongoing, and we keep trying to find
it's not a
solutions.
simple case of the bank want to give it to somebody, anybody. There's a lot of stipulations in there, and that's what we're working out at the moment. Great news with Mr. Mick Hurst, the Battle of Evesham. He's won a very prestigious award, the Superstar Tourism Award by Visit England. Mick brings how many people to the town each year?
Tens and tens of thousands. It's Mick and his merry band of volunteers and those Nigerian actors. They just do an amazing job, don't they? It is definitely the highlight of the calendar when that event's taking place over the weekend.
Of course, helps the wider economy of the town and also beyond. It's a fantastic event. So well done to Mick. So let's talk about planning, not just planning, but a Section 62A notice that the government, the housing minister, has now just slapped onto Wychavon. You may have seen this be talked about by newspapers and what have you, but we're going to do a little deep dive on it. It's a bit of a kick in the nether regions for the council, for Wychavon. We've been serve this 62A notice, which basically means that all planning applications now for 10 houses or more will have an option to either submit to Wychavon or directly to the government, which is the inspectorate, the housing minister, to make the decision. Now, as far as I'm aware, all decisions obviously still have to comply with local policy. It doesn't mean that any of our local policies are any lesser as a result, but it means that we won't have as much influence, if any, if a developer decides to go through an inspectorate to influence the decision or the intricacies of that planning application. There's been a lot of heat discussed about this, particularly by the councillors at Wychavon and Emma Kersey, who is the deputy leader. And I have an audio clip to play. We're going to piggyback off the back of the BBC Hereford and Worcestershire. We have spoken to Emma. She's unavailable to come on, but she will hopefully when we pick this back up. But should we just listen to what she has to say on that, and then we can discuss it?
Well, my initial reaction was, how dare they? And that was literally my reaction. Now, I've always been clear, and I've spoken to you and your listeners before, that since this government have come into play, I've been clear from the outset that they have no clue and no care for the shires, and they seem intent on destroying the countryside. But this now has even staggered me and appalled me at the sheer audacity that they are now taking to ignore the facts and dictate. And it is a sheer affront to local democracy, so that somebody in Westminster can actually decide what happens with regard to anything over 10 houses in Wychavon. That's going to be decided by whoever the minister decides, some inspector in goodness knows where. It's absolutely appalling.
We have approached the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. They say a minority of councils have repeatedly failed to take the decisions needed to build the homes people need. As you heard there, Emma strongly refutes that. We will keep across this story for you.
So, as you can hear, there's a lot of passion and frustration in Emma's voice. That's on the Tammy Gooding show on the BBC Hereford and Worcester channel, and that was on the 17th of June. So, Charlie, how do you feel about all of what we're seeing unfold at the moment?
Well, I mean, it's deeply unfair. It is an affront. The fact is they're using data, historical data, so 2023 to 2025, where we were a 0.7% over where we should have been in terms of the numbers of planning appeals that were overturned. There's loads of factors as to why that's taken place and why that was happening. However, had they taken the figures from 24 to 26, we're now looking at more like 5% of appeals overturned when they go to the inspector, which is much more comfortably within the sort of areas that you would expect it to be. It's just removing our agency as a council, as local people, as local members. You know, planning as district councillors is one of the biggest areas of work that we deal with, and it gets people. You know, it's a difficult subject to talk about and get excited about because it's quite dry at times, but it affects everybody. And when people appreciate how it affects them, people get, you know, in sometimes really emotionally invested in it as well. It can really affect you and your home and your environment, your community. And it's ridiculous. The other fact is that recently our planning department won planning department of like the West Midlands area, you know, for the work that they've been doing. If the government had really wanted to do this, and for them to say that we continually didn't deliver the housing that they wanted to see delivered within the country, is absolutely ridiculous. If anybody has lived in Evesham, even just for a few years, they would have seen the number of developments that have happened in and around Evesham. If you've been here for longer, you know, there's places where I'm only 40 years old. I remember where there was fields and orchards and green spaces, and you know, those are now housing. Now, look, I don't refute the fact that we need housing. We need housing. We need people to be able to live and to own their own home and to do that. And that's important for the economy. It's important for our areas and for the prosperity of those areas, that people can live and grow up here and bring up their families here, find work, etc. So it's really, really important. But to remove our power to have a say on that as a council, it goes beyond spiteful. It feels like an attack. It feels like an attack.
It feels a bit strange though, because obviously the the powers in which they are now taking on, I don't think there's any additional value being given to a developer or to our community as a result of the action that is supposed to be rectifying a problem. I mean, of course, the governments which changed hands, a couple of years ago, the new government committed to 1.5 million new houses across the country, and obviously we have an allocation here in Wychavon that we have to appease to. But of course, that number changed during the South Worcestershire Development Plan renewal, which, if we shine a bit of context on that, the South Worcestershire Development Plan had expired, and basically due to COVID was delayed in its in the review's new adoption. So it meant that there was a bit of a loophole scenario where developers could come to Wychavon and say, oh, I'm going to build 30 houses here, 20 houses there, and then use this loophole that because we didn't have this South Worcestershire Development Plan, the SWDP, adopted, we couldn't necessarily demonstrate that we had a 5-year land supply that is tied in with that plan. And then it triggers section 14 paragraph of the National Planning Policy Framework that basically says, if you can't demonstrate that you haven't got a housing allocation, then we have to build these houses. And I think you pointed out before that those houses that then get approved don't actually form part of the area's allocation.
Sorry, go on, Corey.
Well, I was just saying, it's a bit of a complex mess. I think there's been a lot of outside factors as to why we've got to this point. And obviously, like you've just said, they've used the particular years to come up with 10
if they were being, that's why it's hard to not be skeptical. So this government came in and they want to build 1.5 million more homes in the UK. Admirable, fine, that's fine. But they reduced Birmingham's quota by 30% and increased our quota, for example, by 20%. Not only that, in the process of the last 5 years, we've had additional quotas added to the shires. So, and to be fair, that's happened in consecutive governments. But that's meant that we've been going through a process. So we have to take this proactive process of the South Worcestershire Development Plan, which we do with neighbouring authorities, which again is a proactive approach to make sure that we don't put development, for example, on the doorstep of Worcester that has an impact on Worcester and vice versa. We're working together, same with Malvern Hills. The reality is that we, all three of us, have unfortunately been beset with challenges. I mean, COVID, although it seems like a long time ago, had its knock-on effect and impact. The consecutive governments changing the housing allocations also had its impact. But this approach of the SWDP, where we will go and do a call out for sites, they're all consulted on. Anybody can then raise objections or support for those sites. They go through a very rigorous sort of appraisal of their suitability, on whether that's, if the area is considered to be sustainable, does it have schools, does it have amenities, does it have good transport links, etc., etc. All this stuff has to happen. And then we get to a point where, again, that's then consulted. Then there's some policies around all of that in terms of what does the infrastructure look like, the green levy, all these types of things. And then it goes again for consultation and approval. It takes time, but it's a proactive approach. And the reality, most of the time with the SWDP process, is there's only a short, limited amount of time where there's a 5-year housing land supply because of the length of the process, before you need to start the process again to ensure that you're still within that. But the reality is like I said, we were literally the culmination of that SWDP. We had the election, the government came in and they made this announcement, and they put another 20% allocation onto Wychavon. And that was, it was just blanket. It was just one day. It's a bit like how this notification arrived to us. It was just a letter to say that we're going to increase your housing allocation by 20%. And
so it's a bit like we're running to try and meet to get the SWDP, through the door and approved, and then the allocation numbers change 2/3 into that process, and then and now it still feels like we're having to run at 1 million miles an hour to try and keep up. I mean, my experience with this is that during my time being a councillor, I don't think any one policy has ever aligned with another. I mean, we've got another layer of policy in Harvington, which is their neighbourhood plan, which I'm very very grateful for, and a lot of people put a lot of their voluntary time into creating what is a really complex policy document for the town, for the village of Harvington. And of course, if the South Worcestershire Development Plan isn't in line with the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, it starts to undo very quickly all of that
Yeah.
work. And I don't think, as I say, any policies have really aligned during the last couple of years since I've been elected.
You know, and the other reality is that one of the reasons why we were that fraction over that 10% in that period was because councillors were listening to communities and trying their best to protect them.
How dare they?
But that loophole meant that we were seeing projects come forward, developments come forward that weren't sustainable, that weren't suitable. And we knew that. And the only way that we could do anything about it, because of what's called this tilted balance, where basically, ultimately the bias, if you like, bias isn't probably the right word, but the idea is that we are pro-development from the beginning. That's the stance of a planning department. You have to be pro. There has to be really good legal planning reasons for why something can't happen, and those are really well defined. It's a legal process, and that's why you have inspectors, and that's why you have appeals. And when we talk about it being a democratic process, it's in as much as all of us get the opportunity to have a say, raise objections, or support if we wish to, but ultimately it comes down to planning policy, which is set sometimes by central government, but also controlled by local government, depending on what policies have in place. But when we were seeing these developments come forward, some large scale developments that were coming forward that were unsuitable, the councils and the councillors exercised their only real power that they have, and that was to refuse a planning application. And then unfortunately it might have been overturned by the inspectorate, which, again, we can contest why that happened and should it have happened.
But it's also interesting to say at that point that, obviously when an applicant applies to Wychavon, they pay money to apply. And then it is free, should they receive a refusal, it's free to then go to appeal. It's just a process that every developer is going to do and undertake. And of course, if the inspectorate decides to overturn Wychavon's decision, then it undoes everything that obviously from local perspective have been fighting for. And I think, and we also mentioned about how everything's policy and legally driven. I say this to a lot of people because obviously we receive a lot of applications come in, and you get a lot of emotive emails from people just saying, how is this allowed? This is going to affect X, Y, and Z for where I live. And I have to go back and just say I agree, but the thing is that if it can legally be where it's proposed to be and it ticks all the policy documents, the council, the committee, and certainly a planning inspectorate isn't going to be sympathetic to any emotive stance on what the public have got to say, and that's really where we come in and try and find a way to make sure that developers are working within the policies, that things haven't been overlooked, but also to talk about, what we know of the area. So if a road's not quite working for the community, which is proposed in the application, then we can talk about how can we reroute that? How can we make it better, make some fine tuning, improve it? If there is a property that's going to be backing onto the new development, then we can talk about maybe putting some green space in that particular one area, or planting some trees to cover what will become a new scene for that person. So it's that's where we come in. And I think what we've just had now with this section 62A is that taken away, or the potential of that being taken away on any given development over 10 houses, which is sad, I think, and very painful because it feels like we're being penalised, but in a way that doesn't really help the community. But the wider picture is it's going to more easily put a bit more houses in places and tick a figures box, I guess.
To say it's complicated is really unfair, because it makes out like it's so complicated you can't understand it, and it's not that's not the point I'm making. And
hang on, you can understand it, because that's
it is something that even, and there's times where I'll have conversations with planning officers, and they're heated, sort of like, how can we allow this to happen? And it's because the policy that we have allows it to happen, and that's always a challenge with the policies that at the time of writing they make sense. But unfortunately, sometimes things shift, and then the policy hasn't quite caught up. And then that's always going to be a bit of a dilemma in any kind of system.
What's interesting is that we talk about policy, and obviously the South Worcestershire Development Plan is our local plan, and that's the plan that's combined with Worcester City and Malvern Hills. So obviously it's the collaboration of those authorities. But obviously we talk about what's right and wrong in a policy, and obviously that is political to a degree. but also those policies within that South Worcestershire development plan have to be in tune with and legally sounding with the National Planning Policy Framework, which is set out by government. And everything's a bit of a moving target. So whilst we're trying to make decisions on where large-scale housing developments can go in that area, because we have an allocation as given to us by the government, they say you've got to build X amount of houses, and our plan reflects that, and that's how we know we have an allocation. And of course, we're trying to achieve that with the Wychavon town, which will be, 10,000
that's a really
houses.
good example about when a local authority takes hold and works with developers to come up with a project that actually then, look, a lot of people have feelings about building an open countryside, but this is a project where we're already saying, before we do anything, we need to make sure we've got the sewers, we've got the infrastructure is in place, that all of that stuff is what happens first before we then start worrying about everything else. And that's been the message from the beginning, and that's such a proactive, sensible approach. I mean, the other thing I'd say about the policies and the SWDP is not every single council, so Malvern Hills and Worcester City, are controlled by the same parties. They're different political parties, and we've still managed to come together and create this thing. And that isn't actually, that's a strength, I think, probably, rather than what people might say, well, you've just come up with loads of compromises and it's a difficult thing to follow. Actually, we've got a much more robust policy because of it. How many times have you, Craig, have you spoken to a planning officer or somebody in the planning committee, and they say to you, well, the NFPP says this, and you just think, oh, that bloody NFPP, national, what is it? National, no, it's NPPF,
National Planning Policy Framework.
Yeah, which is just that acronym. Whenever I hear it, whenever someone says to me, "Well, Charlie, but the NPPF says," I just think, "Oh God, we're just we're rallying against something." And it planning is, like I say, if anybody on this podcast that's listening wishes to become a councillor in the future, even under local government reorganisation, planning is one of those things that is one of the most difficult and one of the most contentious issues you deal with, because you'll always have a for and against, and you've got to weigh it all up. And, how many times do we get emails into our inbox from people, really well-meaning, thoughtful, considerate people who just not just dislike, they've got very good reasons why they think something shouldn't happen. But actually, sometimes as a district councillor, I know I'm weighing it up against other priorities that we might have. And it's a really difficult. I think the best thing in those situations, obviously, is to be completely honest and upfront about where you position yourself without prejudicing the decision that might have to happen in the future. But just on the basis of what you know today, I think actually weighing it all up, I think that's a pretty good application. Or what I know today, I think it's a pretty bad application, and I'm going to try and do what I can to stop it happening.
Like we've already discussed, it's not necessarily, a black and white situation where it's either we're going to really be behind approving it or objecting against it. It can sometimes or mostly be a chance to fine tune an application and work with the applicant to make a better development for the community. Just to go back on the Wychavon town thing, that comes under a lot of scrutiny about the scale of it, where it's going. But the alternative is that we're building, developments on top of towns and villages without the infrastructure. I've sat at the committee meetings and banged my fist against the table. Mayor McKersey, give me what for? Because I'm like saying, when can this council, say no to these developments on villages? We're talking outside of the development boundary. It goes against the neighbourhood plan. It was going against the South Worcestershire development plan. And yet the council approved the application. I was furious. You're trying to explain to the village about how we've got to this point with the South Worcestershire Development Plan, with the tilted balance and what have you. And it is really frustrating. But in hindsight now, I'm there saying what we shouldn't be approving this. And actually, we as a council were approving, too many applications to get over that 0.7% threshold, the 10.7% that the government have now measured us against. So I guess it does reflect that the council has been fighting these developments on top of towns and villages. It didn't feel like it at the time. Have to admit, I was really frustrated, as were the community, about what was going on. But we knew that the South Worcestershire Development Plan was going to get adopted very soon. It now has. And to quote Emma Kersey, data from the 1st of April 24 to the 31st of March 26 shows just a 5.2% of applications the council refused were allowed to appeal, were allowed on appeal. Sorry,
and it's really hard to not see 10%. That. It's really hard to not be sceptical about the government. Why wouldn't you use the most recent figures when they've got them? And also, when we adopted the SWDP, we sent a really comprehensive letter to their community and housing minister to say, look, we know we haven't quite been where we wanted to be as a planning department, as a council. We've had to work through a lot of issues, but this is the plan, and we're making good progress on that plan. We again took a really proactive approach to that. It was quite difficult for us to find the director for planning, but we found one. And when they were imposed, they immediately set about putting a number of improvements in place, and those have started to work through. And that's what that 24 to 26 figure clearly demonstrates. So why would you not use it? I just don't understand it. It's not like the announcement came on the 30th, or came in February maybe, and then there would be an argument to say that we're using the historical data. We got this announced. It was just given to us. And I mean, it's a government working on 2 years ago figures. Are they not even looking at the most current data?
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? I'm just to read, I've just pulled up here the actual letter. You're expected to prepare an action plan for approval by the department, identifying actions that address the areas of weakness that led to the council being designated. We'll work closely with you in developing this plan and ensure that you have the support you need to improve.
We're doing it.
So, but this is the thing. I think, when you look at the figure that, Emma Kersey has just written in a statement there about the over 5%, just over figure, and you look at all the actions that have been in place over the last year, like SWDP getting approved. Like, are we not already proving that? And I say it's not. It's at the detriment to the public, to the residents that we serve, that this 62A is now in place, because a developer can go to the inspectorate. I believe it's free for them to do so they can, rather than pay a council. So instead of us, returning an income from the application, we won't be seeing that. They could go to the inspectorate. The inspectorate will just look at the policies and go yes or no, and we won't have any say to mould or shape the project in a way that better suits residents. I don't see how anybody benefits from that, personally.
They don't. Well, the government does, because hopefully they're going to be able to talk about different figures for, this.
Yeah, that argument, though, would be absolutely sane if we didn't have the 10,000 houses in Wychavon town.
Exactly.
If we were only basing it on where we were going to pick and choose certain small developments in and around, I would get it. But the thing is, we have the plan, so it doesn't make sense.
Do you remember? Excuse me. Do you remember when Rachel Reeves came in, sort of one of her first initial speeches as Chancellor? She talked about Wychavon town. She talked about a number of new towns, and Wychavon was one of them that she wanted to force through. She didn't need to, because we had already made great progress. Then the government very quietly dropped it as one of their new towns, because it was never one of their new towns. It was an initiative that we'd already, we'd taken forward as part of the SWDP process, as part of building the Worcestershire Parkway. It was already in motion. It was our plan. We didn't need anybody to tell us that we needed to get a move on, because we were already getting a move on. So it was a nice soundbite at the time. But again, like you say, we're within a really, Wychavon is a rural ward, rural district council. We've got three major conurbations, Droitwich, Pershore and Evesham. They've had their fair share of development. And it's fair to say that the infrastructure within those towns at times can be, the road systems, I don't think schools are struggling in particular. Maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't heard, people finding it difficult to find school places. But again, ultimately some of the schools where they're located are historically, go back 100 years. It made sense to have a school there because it was on the edge of the town. Now they're completely consumed as part of the town. They're in the middle of the town pretty much.
It's interesting you talk about schools, actually, because what I found really interesting is obviously the way that they could determine how the development is going to impact an area is that they look at birth rate figures and they project what the next 5 or so years is going to look like in that area with the new housing. It's not a case of they just turn up, put 20 houses down and expect the school to take it. And also with these, how funding gets allocated at application stage with these developments, like Section 106 funds in particular. I think it's worth mentioning that, the developer doesn't decide where they can basically hand money out to suit. That is all determined by officers and the strict system, that has to be evidence-based. So, for example, like the school, they can't just say, well, we're going to put 20 houses here, but don't worry, we're going to give the school a new sports hall. It has to be proven that the school is going to need a new sports hall with the increased numbers of people that are going to be visiting the school over the next 5 years based on, X, Y, and Z. So it basically means that there cannot be any bribing situations,
No.
And quite rightly. So just to get that out there, 'cause I think that's a really interesting.
Well, again, with all those 106 allocations, stuff like that, the work is being done constantly. Initiatives are being looked at constantly. So where if this housing development was to be built, or there was more houses here, or et cetera, and there was money that was available from 106s or SIL contributions or whatever, they could be put towards these infrastructure projects or these community projects. So that, you're right, it's absolutely never going to be a case where somebody can just come and go and know that the village hall all of a sudden will build you a new village hall. Now, sometimes you get new village halls, but that's part of a much wider piece of work. And it's usually, again, being identified that if we're going to have this number of houses, we need to provide further community amenity to allow for cohesion and to support that in village life, basically. I mean, this is a subject where arguably we could talk about it for a long time. And I think it's, our perspective as members will sometimes be very different from the perspective of the public, of planning officers, of MPs, etc. It is and that's why it's really important that there is a legal process, because otherwise, ultimately, could you imagine what the planning system would look like if it was 100% democratic?
Well, I love the fact that, any application that gets shared online these days is just a number of people that can't help but post the words, oh, who's getting the brown paper bag for that one? Who's getting the bribe for that? Exactly, and I'm like, literally, you can't sneeze without it being recorded. No one dared do anything like that.
And rightly so, but
sorry,
yeah,
you're insinuating that I'm pro.
No. But I mean, it is rightly so. But that's why it's so ridiculous to even insinuate that it's possible, because it just, well, as far as I'm concerned, it just isn't. Just absolutely isn't.
Absolutely not. Well, look, we've spoken to Emma, and I say she couldn't make this particular recording, but she said she's keen to come on here, so hopefully she'll join us with an update, because the council, as we heard in the recording, are fighting the notice. So may it get overturned? May we have sufficient evidence already? I'm hoping it will be a very quick notice and it will get revoked very soon.
I think that there's a lot of work going on in the background to get that sorted. I mean, I would say, Craig, maybe on the back of this episode, if people have got questions, one, what can we answer? But if they've got questions that we could put to Emma in the future, and even if she can't come on, I'm sure Emma would be happy to give a reply, even if that was a voice note or written reply. But equally, it is an area where it's quite interesting to get some questions, and I'm sure people do have questions about how that works. So maybe that's a good subject for a future podcast about some of those things where people scratch their heads and wonder, how did that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, we'll drop your comments below and we'll respond to them. Well, thanks everybody for listening, for joining us. Do give our page a follow, give us a like, do share what you hear, and we will join you next time on the Councilcast. Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you.